Hello everyone and welcome along to another episode of the LOPSided Podcast for legal operations professionals by legal operations professionals. Today, I'm joined by Alex Smith.
Hey there.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good to have you on. Well, let's get straight into you first. Can you give us a bit of an intro on your background?
So my name's Alex Smith. I'm a senior director now in product at iManage. I look after search, knowledge, and AI, which I'm sure we'll come on to later on.
Yes.
My background is about 25 years now in legal tech, legal change, legal transformation, all different words, starting in content, going in some time at law in a law firm in a legal innovation role, and obviously now back in the technology side.
Wow. So I always asked our guests these three strangish questions, but little things, please little minds, as they say. But who is your hero?
It's a good question, actually. I reflected back on this. I am an 80s child, so my childhood hero probably still is a hero, is Viv Richards.
Hey.
Of the West Indies cricket team of the time, who I saw twice with my granddad up at Leeds. And just kind of always his drive, his willingness to overcome things, and obviously his genius was probably motivational early doors.
Amazing. And what is your greatest accomplishment?
Not sure I've got one. I thought about this, and I don't think I've quite finished the things that I'm doing right now, and I hope that is probably the greatest accomplishment. But other than that, having a house, living in London for 20 years, having a great partner and a lovely cat probably is my accomplishments.
Well, let's switch it up a bit then. As a fellow 80s baby, what's your favourite 80s movie?
Oh, wow. Probably a Top Gun or something like that. Probably.
Great choice.
Probably. There's some great films in there.
Did you like the sequel?
I did like the sequel. I was surprised. I was willing to be disappointed, and then I was surprised by how good it was.
Well, and this kind of segues nicely into the last part, which I'm hoping is 80s infused. Which song would you sing on a team karaoke night out?
I'm a bit more 90s on the music.
So
kind of my teenage, early 20s. So I have a time-locked iPod 3, I think, that a girlfriend at the time brought back from New York. It still works. And it's all 90s music. So my karaoke, because I can't sing to save my life, is Rage Against the Machine, Killing in the Name of, because it's largely screaming. But if I could sing, it would probably be Zombie by Cranberry, but I'm nowhere near good enough to do that.
Cranberry's a great band. And what's the one job that you'd trade your current role for in a heartbeat?
So it's an interesting question. I read this before, and I'm kind of getting to the age, I'm just about to turn 50, so I'm kind of thinking last 10, maybe 15 years of career and what I'd like to do. And I think it's to probably finish off kind of some of the stuff I'm doing here. And I really, really would like to do something in kind of government, big scale digital transformation that actually impacts citizens. I've spent a lot of time with professionals. So I think probably the last 5 years of my career, and you can place that wherever you want, 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, would be working in something like a government digital, doing something that genuinely impacts citizens. I think we spend a lot of time working with professionals. I think law and all the stuff I've learned should be impacting the average citizen better.
Yeah, it's a really interesting view. And I mean, 5 years in a government role, that won't get you far, would it?
I don't know. The government digital is actually one of the really interesting examples of the last 20, maybe 15 years, especially around things like service design and user experience. And they are very focused on how do services be easily explainable to citizens and citizens to increasingly self-serve. Now, the state of the systems, the state of departments, the state of courts, etc. right now, especially the change of government, is interesting. But that team have definitely tried to drive digital excellence, whether they've achieved it or not, whether bureaucracy gets in the way or not. Entirely different podcast, probably.
Yes. So we've got a really interesting topic here, haven't we? We're going to cover navigating AI and digital and successfully implementing strategies, what law firms are doing wrong. And I think you're really well placed on this, of course, being somebody who's spent a long time, as you said, in law, outside of law, now at big legal tech. But let's start with you first. And what does a typical day look like for you in your current role?
So the current role is I have a team, or I have two teams. I have a product team, and they are driving forward our product. So there's three people on that. I sit in a broader product team under the director of product at iManage, who deals with the entire portfolio, which includes document management system, security,
A lot.
everything. I look after kind of this search knowledge area. So I have some product managers who look after that. I have a data team. So I have a team that basically are building models, testing stuff, looking at quality, etc., which I'm sure we'll come on to again a bit later on AI, which is a big question, especially as everything's changing so fast, and also search measurement as well. And then probably I have my virtual teams I have to deal with, like our data science team and my engineering team that build the stuff that I have. And so there's that part, and that's everything from man management to actually, what do we actually deliver, quality, planning, strategy, etc. And then the other side, especially given the way that iManage puts product people very in front of the customer, is a lot of customer meetings. So that can be, I'm global, so that can be a call with a massive US firm, a New York firm, a San Francisco firm, an Australian firm, a Singapore firm, corporate legal organizations. So there's a lot of customer meetings nearly every day, or in fact every day. So yeah, a lot of juggling the internal and the external.
Well, that may or may not lead us perfectly into the next question, which is, what is the most challenging part of your role?
I think the challenging part is I have a strategy hat, I have a customer hat and customer discovery and trying to drive things from a customer perspective.
Yeah.
I have a delivery hat, and then I have a person management hat. And so it's just, I think we use the term in tech a lot. I'm not sure if you use in legal a lot about the term context switching. So for someone in my role, probably too much context switching between, an emergency issue, a personal issue, a team issue, oh my God, I got to get my head around something really, really crazy about how we're going to test something on a new piece of tech. So whilst we spend a lot of time in tech trying to eliminate context switching, I guess someone at my role level is just context switching and trying to be attentive to every meeting when you've just come from a management thing straight into a new tech thing or a customer meeting. So
God, that must be mentally draining.
it is very mentally draining. I would say, yeah, I'm not sure I've got all the coping techniques for that, but
and we touched on it earlier about the fact you've been, in law firms and in legal tech. What would you say are the main differences in working in legal tech and working in law firm?
I think law firms, their product is not a technology. Their product is advice. It's a done deal. It's litigation, which can go on for years and years. That's their product. And so the focus, whilst, we sit in roles, often in IT or innovation or whatever it may be in a law firm, we all love to talk about the tech and what the tech could do, but ultimately that's not the product. The product is the outcome of legal work. And that's a different mind shift, because then you have to think about the people, you have to think about what's being delivered. We can talk about innovation in law firms. It should be client-centric, etc. Whereas if you're in a tech, whilst yes, we want to be about outcomes and what's the outcome, again, we'll probably talk more about that. Ultimately, your focus is on delivering tech, which is delivered by releases or regular cadence and blockages and all those kind of things. So that would be the one big change. I guess the other one is that law firms are not necessarily set up for building broad scale productized technology. So I'm dealing with tech teams of 30, I'm dealing with UX teams, etc. And to some degree, that's what I missed when I went into the firm. The challenge was to try and do all the bits of those jobs anyway on the law firm side. And obviously, we can talk more about how we do or don't think people are scaling. Law firms can scale that kind of technology, etc. But there's a lot more. I'm definitely got the tech team, the UX team, all of those product team on the technology side, which is a big difference.
And what are the main things that law firms do wrong when they, to use the design thinking mantra, understanding, exploring and materializing the need to buy or build digital solutions? Because we do see this a lot, right? Law firms go into the buy or build phase. Oh, can we put this together ourselves? Is it scalable? Um, I mean, what do they do wrong constantly?
I think it's a continuum. Like the way I'd put it is I was in the law firm in the 2016 to 2018. And whilst that may not seem as exciting as the Gen AI phase, there was definitely an AI phase that was there, and there was a transformation phase, and there was a shall we put some tech in phase. And I think they probably struggled with the what is the customer. I'm going to use the word customer. I know we should use the word client. The customer pain point. So there was quite a lot of we build some technology and we'll show that to the customer and they'll like it. And I think what I was trying to do at the time was go, and I'm very well supported by the firm I was in, and others aren't, I don't think, was go and talk to the actual customer, the GC, the person you deal with, maybe, dare I say it, not just the GC, but the actual business person at the organization, and find out what they really want. And often that can be a much more simplified approach. And that could be that the process needs to change. You don't need any technology. Or it could be the way you deliver something very simple is the big change. I think in some ways the Gen AI piece has, and there's a lot more talk this time round about experimentation. So I think that what people are doing, I hope what people are doing this time is not jumping to build something. I hear a lot more, and I don't know the truth, maybe you've got a view as well, is that there's a lot of experimentation at the moment. This technology is so undefined, but has potential that people are experimenting. Now, I hope they're experimenting with their clients and their customers, etc., as well as obviously innovating internally. And we can again talk about efficiency and internal pieces as well. So I think things have changed. I'm not quite sure they're at the point of, right, we're 100% design thinking with our customers and designing stuff, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's probably still some FOMO and there's still some stuff that needs to go into RFPs, et cetera. But I think we've learned something over the last few years, and I get the feeling people aren't rushing too quickly into building things or even necessarily buying things yet. I know there's a lot of big announcements and people saying they're working with, but it feels very early stage, and people will change their minds as things scale or work, et cetera. So maybe in a better place right now.
Yeah, and there's a lot of noise, isn't there? And funny enough, I was speaking on another podcast, speaking to Shaquille over at UBS, and we was talking about this kind of industry feeling that people are kind of trying to bolt Gen AI onto finding problems to use it for, as opposed to clearly defining a problem and saying, hey, we may need this, it may be something different we need. But it's this kind of, it feels like this kind of insatiable thirst to just say we're using it in some way to improve something without really understanding what the problem is they're trying to solve. Is that something that you're seeing from through your lens?
I think, again, the audience listening to this, right? There's some people who are doing some really good stuff. And I think they will be the people that we just talked about, design thinking, what's our business strategy that this could help us out. But what I'm also hearing is when you are forced to do that, looking at the problem, the business issue, what the ROI or whatever metric you have on it is happening, is potentially you'll come back and say, well, why is Gen AI solving this? It could be solved by another technology that we haven't utilized for the last X amount of time. So there's a lot of conversation, for example, around drafting. Gen AI looks like, you could chat or throw a clause in and say, hey, bring me back loads of other examples of this, this, and this. But ultimately, when you dig into, say, the drafting process, you're probably going to discover things like, well, we don't really use templates, or, hey, we want this to be really consistently delivered, and Gen AI may not do that. So why don't we look at document automation? And then they realize they've either got that tool or they've underutilized that tool, et cetera. So it's interesting, some of the debates which are going on. I think you're right that probably the last 12 months has been a bit of a bolt-on by everyone everywhere. And there is that RFP question, or what are we doing, or keeping up with the Joneses, FOMO activity, which is not, that's the same on the corporate legal side. It's the same in the law firm side. And to be perfectly frank, it's probably the same in the technology side. I'm not really wanting to go into examples in legal tech, But my Jira tool where I put my requirements in now has a auto-generate my requirements tool, and I'm like, why?
Yeah.
And whatever. My ServiceNow has a ServiceNow Gen AI tool which can auto-generate insights. And I'm like, no, I've got to go and find the insights myself. Insights shouldn't be auto-generated. They should be because I go and talk to the customer and the end user. So there is a lot of a bolt-on, and that feels strange.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I don't want to sound like I'm picking on the law firms a bit here, but because there is a big shift, I think, in how legal tech is being sold.
Yeah.
And if I think about in one of my roles that the last 12 months to 24 months, the change in approach, it's like regardless of what the tech was and what the solution, what problem it was solving, the whole sale of it, the presentation of it is now AI enabled. And to your point, some of it just feels a little bit like, but do you need that? Like what is the role it's playing? It's just kind of this broad net has just been thrown across everything now that you have to have or at least refer to some form of AI in the sales piece. And is that something that's being led, do you think, by the buyers? Do buyers expect whatever they're buying now to have an AI add-on bolt-on? Or is it just legal tech trying to look current in the way they're selling what they're selling?
It's a difficult question, right? Because it's not at maturity phase, right? There's a lot of hard work to make certain things happen. It's going to take time, and that we can talk about. I talked about my team a little bit. There's a lot of work around accuracy. Does it actually, it looks on the surface that someone playing with ChatGPT can do X, but in reality, you need to look at the outputs and go, are those outputs good? And you're seeing a lot of people trying to set boundaries like, hey, it accelerates something. It's better than I think Microsoft said it's better than a blank sheet of paper, or an incorrect answer is useful. And it's kind of like, but useful to what? There's certain legal work that in your job and when I was on the other side trying to actually do stuff that has to be accurate, or has to be in a certain way or consistent or whatever. So I think it's still not mature. So people are kind of putting things in, and it seems like it's a little bit experimental. But you are right that it kind of feels like every brochure has to have something or what you're doing. And what is the pitch? Is the pitch a very shiny web page saying that, or is the pitch conversations with the actual clients? And the privilege from my role, and I'd say last year was the most stressful year of my entire career, but I did do like 100, 200 interviews with IT directors and knowledge directors and people like that. And we had very open dialogue, and in some ways a dialogue about uncertainty that led to use cases that was talking about some very exciting areas, but also some very boring areas that people have always wanted to work. And does Gen AI or some level of the technology under that help solve older problems? And equally, I think from the law firm side is there's been a debate about should you drive this from use cases, i.e. things you actually want to do, or should you be open and experimental and see what lawyers do? And I think there's been a lot more conversation about the use cases, and people are going back in, diving into use cases. And then I think that's a very good grounding back to your service design thinking piece. That becomes a very good grounding, saying we just need to solve this process. And maybe that what's happening is it's opening up lawyers to spending a bit more time on the process or what they do, as opposed to just going, oh, this is going to solve everything. Or equally, the famous thing about lawyers not wanting to touch technology, which I think is rubbish, but that's come out again a little bit.
Yeah, and actually there was a really good article I read on this. I think around Hillary Goodyear and the team at Ashurst Advanced talking about how they was really kicking tires on the AI they were using. And I think that's important as well, right? If you're a client, you expect your law firm to be doing this R&D basically in a controlled environment, not on the job, whilst delivering
or being forced to pay for
that
as well as part of that.
Being forced to pay for them to learn. But one other thing I wanted to touch on, and I'm really keen because I know you're a deep lying expert in this field. And I'm not. I mean, I like it. I read a lot about it. I try to upskill myself. And I have a genuine passion for this. One of the things that I've found, as somebody who thinks I'm quite knowledgeable in this space, I've been in circumstances, conferences is one example where the Dunning-Kruger effect is really very much in play, where I'm listening to panels talking about AI, and some of it feels like, they're not quite on point with what they're saying. Is that a real danger for the industry, to have people up on pedestals, panels, talking about things that could potentially be so disruptive and not really understanding the intricacies of how to use them, sometimes maybe governance and controls around safe usage of them? Is that, I suppose, the first? It's a long-winded question,
Yeah.
but I suppose the first thing to ask you is that something you've seen as well?
I think I don't really go to conferences anymore because of exactly that. I don't. What am I learning because of that piece? Now, obviously, there's different conferences, etc. I think what you'd always look for about someone standing on stage is, are they a doer? Are they tied to change in the organization? Do you feel like they understand the entire piece around how a new technology or a technology is going to end up in the stack with other technologies actually makes change happen? So I think what you can end up with is listening to a load of people talking theoretically about this piece. What you'd always look for, I would always look for, is, do I feel that person is tied into the business of that organization, the hard yards of the change, the hard yards of actually tying that to better service, efficiency, revenue, whatever the drivers are in the organization. Otherwise, it is a bit of a talking shop,
Yeah,
would be my guess. And it's someone that you can go up to afterwards and say, okay, do you have a handle on the metrics, or how accurate is that based on, which, that Ashurst thing recently was really good, right? It started to say, we've measured some stuff. I think there was one by Linklaters as well recently, where they went, oh, we put this out to 100 lawyers and we've measured the quality of the outputs because that helped us work on X. And if someone's standing up there with those stats, or feeling that that person is tied to the business outcome, yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
But I think there's a lot of people for whose job is a little bit just talking about, I saw this and I'm going to apply it over here, or I was playing with ChatGPT and it seemed to produce an NDA, so therefore, how can it not? So I guess it's tied to I always want to spend time with the doers.
yeah. I think there's, and to that point on the, speaking to 100 lawyers, I think there's the intricacies there of how Gen AI performs on a particular task or
Yeah.
set of tasks. I think one conference I was at, and the guy speaking was a managing partner at I think it's small to mid-sized firm, and made a comment something along the lines of, "Oh, yeah, we've tested our AI and it does what the lawyer does in half the time," and kind of didn't really delve too deep into it. And it was like, well, what what does it do in half the time?
Yeah.
And it's just those kind of sweeping statements, and we hear it everywhere, don't we, about will Gen AI and will AI replace lawyers? And I mean,
I think there's big statements you can make. If you put something 5 years or 10 years in the future, you can always fall back on that. The impact's not going to be now, but the impact's going to be in the future. And, pick your other innovation trope like faster horses or whatever it may be. But ultimately, if this is going to make a change, well, that's not going to just naturally change all the way stuff's delivered. That's going to then ripple into everything. And you should be able to see the signs of the ripple. It should go into people like yourself, who have now got to go down to task level processes, redesign the task level processes, decide whether they're slightly improving the existing process, or they've just got to, this is so big, I'm going to tear up the entire process and reprocess. Now, if that partner could stand up and say, yep, we played around with this, and now and then I had to go away and reprocess the entire thing, and I'm offering the fee at 75% of what it was previously, and we deliver it 10 hours later, 10 hours faster. Brilliant. I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to look at your diagram of that, and etc. But if you're going to go and say, well, in 3 years' time, lawyers will do half the work they're doing and we'll get double the work in, you're kind of almost do that kind of Susskind level prediction, aren't you?
Yeah, it's just so fascinating. I think one thing comes to mind is kind of translation, and it's just like looking at the bigger picture, right?
Yeah.
So court documents need to be stamped. You can't just translate them anywhere.
Yeah.
So they need that level of authenticity on the translation. But equally, lawyers might be sitting there thinking, well, hold on a minute, to get this 5-page document translated from, I don't know, English to Mandarin is going to cost this much with this, local counsel. But I can just throw it in ChatGPT. But then you're like, well, I mean, it's like putting client data on Facebook, isn't it? It's just the real understanding to know where that data goes once it's hit ChatGPT. Do you think law firms are doing enough around the governance and controls in responsible usage of AI?
I think this is, whatever happens on, let's call it the front end, lawyers drafting, lawyers translating, lawyers doing X, Y, and Z. I think the real positive of the last year or so has been the area about data, grounding of data. There's a term called grounding, which is basically saying, what data would you expose to a safe version of OpenAI, a safe version of whatever model is going to be the next model, whatever model you use. And so that has led a big spotlight on things like knowledge, governance, structures, security, etc. And thinking about it not just from, I guess, the boring side of that. What happens if, and then lawyers go, I just got to get this done fast, etc. You're now starting to talk about, if we're going to apply some, I don't know, chat, search, whatever bot to something, 5 lawyers at a firm have different accesses to 5 different types of documents. So potentially they're all going to get 5 entirely different answers to the same question. How do you govern that? How do you explain that, etc.? And then what happens if, the old one on search projects was that people would run an enterprise search project, and then when you're just about to go live, you suddenly realize that your fantastic new algorithm is showing you documents that should be locked down. So then you go through a 6-month program of going back and locking down certain things you should lock down, and why did that turn up? So I think the positive of this is we don't know the outcome, but the positive really feels like we need to govern data better. We need to think about our security better. We need to think about our knowledge assets. We need to think about actually enforcing how knowledge is stored, etc. Even something really boring like closing documents. Closing documents don't always end up in the right place.
Yeah.
They don't always get sent to the customer. The client doesn't always download them and put them in the right place. We know this historically, but now you're wanting to run a bot that says what's happened in all the past deals as, I don't know, corporate legal. They're going to look back over their deals and say, what's the trend on our deals? And you're going to need to know that they're all in the right place. Otherwise, you're going to get a skewed answer.
Yeah, and I do kind of feel a bit for law firm leaders in this, this AI revolution, because I think at one end of the spectrum, you've got, the responsible kind of more conservative firms that they're not rushing to market to talk about what they're doing with AI. And then at the other end, you've got the firms that are maybe going a bit too quickly and, pushing too much through. So getting that balance right, is there a right balance to get? Do you think? It's so difficult, isn't it?
It's interesting. You mentioned one, a client organization that you've been speaking to. There's a responsibility on them to ask for the right things. I've been at an organization, again, not quite as dramatic as this Gen AI revolution, but the last AI one. And you could definitely put the clients into buckets, which was the RFP question on innovation and AI doesn't mean anything. It's there just to say, my firm feels innovative, my firm feels they're doing something. But there were other organizations where it was more about the outcome. We're cost pressured, or we need to do something better. We want to see a slightly better service, or we want to see better delivery. And how do you prove that? And I think ultimately you can't prove that by putting in going, we bought X. It's proven by, we do these matters more consistently because we put the right people on it, we use the right tools at the right time. And that's hard yards under the bonnet of process redesign and etc. So it's a hard one, right? Because there are other reasons why organizations need to be seen to be innovative. Because if you are the lawyers for big tech, you need to be seen to be understanding big tech. You are not, those big tech companies are not asking for more cheaper legal services.
Yeah.
So you have to be proving that you're putting out there, we're using stuff. But are those clients really asking for cheaper legal services or better legal services? No, you're putting it out there because of your marketing. I think the organization, I think the test with these things is always of, do clients see the ROI on this eventually? Do they get back better services or whatever they're asking for, cheaper services, more insightful services, or not? And I don't think we're at that stage. I'd probably say the quieter firms are probably the ones having the deeper conversations with their clients.
Yeah, it's interesting though, isn't it? Because I think regardless of where you are on that spectrum, there is no hiding from the fact that the disruption of AI is coming and will be fundamental to some extent. And that's probably a really good opportunity to plug an upcoming podcast with Tamara Box, who you'll know from
Tamara,
Reed Smith, on the ostrich strategy. Brilliant podcast, that one. So do stay tuned for that one. But so I suppose on that point, it's really hard, isn't it? Because I was going to say to you, are law firms doing enough to harness the power of AI? But it goes back to that point, doesn't it? Some maybe are. How responsibly are they doing it? That's probably a separate question.
Yeah.
And we've touched on data, and kind of data underpins a lot of this. And the industry has seen a real focus by clients on their data. Does that align with the buyer habits you're seeing from law firms? Is it really still focused on data primarily?
I think what you're seeing is a few, like under the bonnet. I have a hashtag many years called it IA before AI, which is information architecture before artificial intelligence. And it was a reasonably facetious comment in 2017, which is now stuck, which is great. And I think what that says is that if this stuff becomes as ubiquitous as we think, it has to ground itself in trusted data. Now, it isn't just documents and knowledge documents, or like closing sets are all in the right place, which they're big enough tasks as they are, right? There's a history of cleaning something up. There's a going forward, making sure the processors put documents in the right place and create knowledge or whatever it may be. I think it's also going into, for the IA around things like business data, and everyone tried in many different spaces. We as an organization want to do more around understanding our customers through data. We've had data lake periods and all of those things, but I think it accelerates that again, right? You want to be able to say, how many deals have we done in X? Or if you're a corporate, what's the value of our contracts based on, 2 years to run still on the term, et cetera, et cetera. And I think everyone's coming back round on both structured data and also better organizing the unstructured data, by which I mean textual data, like what's in your documents, what's in your contracts, what's in your advice, et cetera. So I think data is becoming really, really important, not just, are my things that I want to expose to this, which feels very textual. Conversations are very textual at the moment. Oh, I could look inside my document. I could look at lots of contracts. I could look at lots of advice, etc. But ultimately, the context around those documents is structured data, matter structures, security structures, the business structures tied to the matter structures, the profitability tied to the people. And I think all that data becomes something that people want to get in place for this. I think the other thing I would say is that actually the fun thing about some of this stuff is the AI could do some really boring stuff. It could clean up data. So, you've got to think about your business systems. You might have 6 different business systems, all of which capture some time or do X. Maybe you just send the AI off to standardize it. Great, now I can actually look at my time versus your time in 2 different systems. Or it can go into a document and classify the document and say this document is an asset purchase agreement. And now at least I can search it and find it and say, I've actually looked at all my asset purchase agreement because it's done some really boring stuff. So everything feels front end at the moment, but the back end stuff, some of this technology, not just Gen AI, but more, lots of different fields of AI and data cleanup that could be all applied to this. And I think potentially there's willing at the moment to do that.
So kind of using innovation to enhance modernization, really, right? So you're kind of modernizing your firm, your infrastructure, by using, like you say, it's not really the sexy stuff, but it's the stuff that really matters, right?
Yeah, because ultimately, if you're then going to go in, let's say, you run a pilot and it says that 27% of drafting time could be taken out of negotiation because of this AI, right? some point, someone's then got to go back and look at all the business data and say, what does that impact? Is that going to impact fixed fees, non-fixed fees? What's that going to happen on our profit line? And then they're going to go into 6 different systems and go, oh, let's get all that into Excel and try and do something. Because, as I said, if this really is going to do something, the knock-on effect on every business service, back-end system, etc., is going to come out. It's not because I want to have a nice chat with my time billing. It's going to be, well, what do I change? Which matters are disrupted by this? Which clients are disrupted by this? Where do I have to go and reposition our position with that client?
So, final question, and it's more a piece of advice, really. Which 3 pieces of advice would you give to somebody that has been tasked with procuring AI or digital products and services and successfully implementing them in a law firm?
I think it's, number one, what's the outcome you're trying to get from what you're doing? And to be fair to people, experimentation is a good one. But if you're doing experimentation, you probably don't want to take a target on profitability or success or, changing the entire culture. So what's your outcome for the thing you're trying to do? Are you trying to prove something? Are you actually going after a specific process? Are you working with a specific practice area? Do you have on the corporate legal side, do you have a certain problem with advice, clients, contracts? So I'd say outcomes is number one. I'd say, how are you going to measure this? So thinking about measurement. So how, there's a thing called OKRs at the moment called objectives and key results. It's quite popular with big tech, etc. We use it. But you have an outcome, then you have the key results. So how do you measure that? Like, genuinely, how do you measure, if you're going to do drafting, for example, we keep on using drafting, I hate it, but that's good. But, how are you actually going to measure that 27%? And is it 20%, it's 27% that matters? Is it 27% you currently write off? There's lots of questions about measurement. So I think that's difficult because measurement always then leads into people kind of having a bit of a gut feel and then looking at a metric which probably isn't quite the answer, let's say time billing, etc. And I'm looking at you because I know you do this kind of work and process disintegration and rebuilding, etc. So I think measurement does lead to a lot more underlying things, and so be prepared to kind of disappear down the rabbit hole on measurement. But I guess the last piece is, how do you set the right expectations with very, very important knowledge workers, right? And they might be excited by something, but they can lose that excitement very quickly by a bad experiment or a badly planned piece, and then you've lost them. Often, we have a product called Tracker, which is basic task management, etc., and checklists. I love checklists. If you ever read the Checklist Manifesto, brilliant. But we didn't overly quickly release that because we wanted to make sure it was right, because you kind of get one go with a very important professional before they say this is rubbish, and then you don't see them again for another 3 years. Now, if that person is someone who leads a practice group or someone who works on the most major client, you want to get that right. So understanding the stakeholder, understanding, are they an innovative stakeholder or someone who's a late majority, to use late, early majority, etc. Understanding who you're dealing with rather than just going scattergun is important. So targeting audience. If you're going back to your outcome of being experimental, work with experimental people. If your target is fixing something very, very hard-nosed, then make sure you've got the right business professionals supporting you, etc. Because again, you don't want to lose people by doing the wrong project at the wrong time.
Yeah. And one part of that around implementation, which I think is a really key element here, because you can procure whatever you procure, say from iManage, and then it gets to the implementation phase. Liam Marshall, who was on a podcast previously, he and I were talking about structuring the right implementation team and some of the challenges that we'd seen on both sides where the wrong people were brought in or the right people were brought in too late. Is that something that you see often in your role at iManage when it comes to implementation? Are you trying to remind people to say, yeah, okay, I get your project team are here, I get your procurement team are here, where are the end users, where are the people that... Do you find yourself needing to remind law firms about that, or are they getting better at knowing what the kind of the anatomy of that project team needs to look like?
It's a delicate one, isn't it? Because you come in and you go, okay, here's this piece of software, we might want to do something with that. And then there's a process, and we don't need to talk about that, but there's a process that goes through about technology and does it fit with where you currently are and wider picture, etc. But ultimately, what work has already gone into understanding the problem, understanding the constituency, what is that problem, etc. And so it's hard because, especially in legal, people, and it's the same on that, legal services as a product, is if a client says something, everyone suddenly jumps to conclusions and does something. And many faults of tech in the past have been, we built something and then we realized that wasn't what they wanted, or it wasn't a major pain point because we didn't measure it. So having the boldness to maybe take a little step back and say, let's spend a bit of a time on discovery. And that can sound awful, right? It's like, we're going to have to wait an extra month. We're going to have to interview a load of people. And it might already been done. The best stakeholders are the ones who already know this and have already done that. They've already walked the floors. They've already been around all the major partners. They've talked to associates. But ultimately, just having that piece of saying, are we completely comfortable with the problem? And have we measured that? And have we decided who are the early adopters, late adopters? How are we going to do the adoption plan? So ultimately, if you think about it, implementation is the thing that comes after discovery, and it's the thing that comes before adoption. And if you start to think about that as the entire project, then we're in a better place. If we just go to implementation and don't forget the two things that booktail it, then I think that's where a lot of problems can arise, or shelfware, or projects which certain people love, but ends up being that partner group over there do it really, really well, but the rest of the organization run it an entirely different way.
Yeah. Great. Alex, thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you very much.
We've got through to the Mythbusters section, so where we separate fact from fiction, the things that we're hearing or are being heard. We've referenced conferences, corridors, and really try to kind of demystify and debunk to a certain extent some of these common phrases and themes and things that we're hearing. And as we're talking about technology, it's only fair that we have a high-tech solution for how we categorize these. So, Alex, this is your
Okay.
button. And just press and tell us why you've pressed if you disagree with any of these statements. Well, let's get into it, shall we? So the current trajectory for AI means that lawyers will be obsolete by 2035.
I'm going to go straight.
DEFCON 5 as well. So
okay, wow. I think if you think about what lawyers do and you take out some of the, I think, is it the right term? Drudgery?
Drudgery, yeah.
Stuff which seems like, why is a very expensive person doing this, or someone who's gone through a lot of education to do certain things. Ultimately, you don't go to lawyers to do that work. You go to lawyers for human advice around human relationships in human activities, either positive activities like these two companies want to come together to do something great, or a negative thing of, I don't like you and I want to sue you. Ultimately, you come because of the human, and you hire someone very, very good because they can solve the humanity of a dispute or a transaction or something like that. So I think if you give those people better data, give them more thinking time, give them less pain in just getting the bureaucracy done on that, you're going to get to better outcomes. And ultimately, the client wants better outcomes to hire people. Now, I'm sure there's some other places where no one wants to pay for an NDA, the 17th NDA we need to do today, or why are we getting a contract in 30 states in the US because they're all different, etc. And so, yeah, 100% that piece can go. But the best lawyers you ever meet are the people that the clients utterly trust with their human or business interactions, and empowering people to do more of that is exactly what a knowledge work industry should be doing.
So you envisage a kind of shift where the more complex and the human aspects of legal advice will be more of the day-to-day for lawyers, more efficiency basically, and more value in it, right? And the more mundane tasks, the less difficult tasks are the ones that the AI, the technology will disrupt.
AI, automation, process, document automation, That should all be just saying, when we've worked out the outcome, now let's just do the paperwork to that. But ultimately, the advisory side, the what's the better outcome side. And I think sometimes we spend our time thinking about efficiency.
Yeah.
And, we can make lawyers more efficient. Well, what happens if lawyers could do different work? Imagine a lawyer can see all the data properly at an organization when they're in a dispute. E-discovery's done some element of this. Imagine a lawyer could see, how have I told you about how you should be doing employment contracts, and over the last 3 years it's diverged down here, and in the near future you're going to have a problem. Let's solve that before it becomes a problem. That'd be awesome, right? Lawyers don't really do that because the client goes off, does something, and then there's a dispute in 5 years' time, and then the lawyers make some money out of that. So imagine a more preventative, proactive lawyering where you can go in and solve problems before they happen, or be more advisory, or, I don't want to say it, but trusted advisor side, driven by data, driven by being able to do things you can't do right now because you need a crisis to happen before you get hired. That to me is the exciting piece. Let's get rid of the drudgery.
Yeah. So second question or statement: the majority of law firms you have encountered have a huge skills and knowledge gap when it comes to truly understanding AI and Gen AI in particular.
I'm not going to press the button on that. I think there's a lot of organizations with some incredibly talented people in, either on the lawyer side and whether they get the time to think about it, etc., because of pressures and billing and all of those things. But I also think the business services teams and the legal ops teams are incredibly talented. And I think a lot of the skills they need are old skills, not new skills. So if you think about, grounding Gen AI in trusted data, let's be really frank, that's knowledge management. A lot of legal ops work is knowledge management, right? And so you've got people who already know this stuff. You've got legal research teams who understand how to find the right data sets and how they run searches. And the last round of, Google search is going to mean people don't find the right information. You've got those skills. You've got amazingly talented business services skills on things like pricing and data, right? Give them some more tools. They're surprisingly quickly. I just like to move, pricing teams out of Excel and into some crazy cool tools. Imagine the insights it could then drive into roles like yours, right? That then say, how do we reprocess stuff? So whilst there are some flashy job titles that everyone goes, why doesn't the firm have a data scientist? To be honest, by the time you get through some of this tech stuff soon and it's more buy rather than build, you're going to trust organizations to give you technology, and your business services teams don't necessarily want to do that. They just want to get the data they've always wanted and struggled with, or they want to be getting the backing to put the right data in the right place, or they want the backing to put in place processes and tools like workflow, which has been around for 20 years, to actually implement that to get the right outcome. So I think the right people are there. I think we have to rethink what skills they bring and don't make it all about new skills. Otherwise, you'll just say, we don't have data scientists, we don't have data analysts or whatever. You probably do have them. You might need to have more of them. You might need to work that in the business model, but 100% you've probably got people who do that. And then don't underestimate the native knowledge that's in people's heads. You've got people who've done that for 20 years. You've got people who know where the problems are, et cetera, et cetera. So bringing in, a flashy role is, you've got to think about how that person fits with the rest of the organization. When I get people poking for, Alex, would you like to go and do this? I'm always like, well, who would this work with? And to some degree, is this person going to piss off the existing people that are in the organization? Because at which point your job's dead at that point.
Yeah.
So how does it all fit, I think? So I'm not going to press the button on the gap. You've got a lot of native knowledge. You've got a lot of people that could be accelerated by better ways to analyze data or more focus.
Yeah.
More focus on, we need to be more efficient because we need to take out that work over there so that we can pay for this new stuff over there. So suddenly someone's coming to someone like you saying, right, how do we accelerate the process change or the alternative services or whatever it may be?
Excuse me. Okay, and the final question. If law firms truly understood the potential of having better data capture and management structure in their business, they'd be dedicating more time and resource to harnessing its potential.
That's an interesting question. I'm not quite going to press it again.
Okay.
I think organization, like organizations, knowledge work organizations, accountancy, law firms, even businesses with their GCs, etc. I think they know the things that they currently measure. Now, probably we could sit for another couple of hours on, are we measuring the right things? Are we delivering? Is billable hour the right rate to measure something versus value pricing and all those things? So I think they understand the metrics they understand and are pretty good at it, right? They bill, money comes in, does some money, do they totally realize that? No, but do they realize how much they don't realize? Yes. I'm kind of thinking of certain people who kind of criticize me here saying they're measuring the wrong things. I think they understand the measurement of that. I think it's the time of saying, if this is going to change stuff, how do we remeasure? What aren't we capturing? What else do we need to do? Something like resource allocation, right? Classically, resource allocation is probably not on the best routes, but probably people would have an idea of who's busy, who's not busy, who's good, who's not good. But how do you make that resource allocation fairer, more diverse, etc.? So I think some of these things are a step forward. Like, we know this, but we want it to be fairer. So therefore we need to put in a system. Therefore we need to capture stuff. We want more diverse teams to be working on something. Okay, we need people to be happier about their work. Okay. So I think maybe I'm being a bit too much of an incrementalist. I'm an incrementalist because people do know how to measure things, but maybe they're not measuring the right things.
Yeah.
And so therefore you got to trust people to know that measuring something is important. Like, I would never criticize law firms for not being able to measure things. They're very good at measuring things. And we got to start thinking about, how do we measure the newer things or the changes or the incremental or step changes? Let's call it step changes, because I don't think it's going to be a radical, everything changes overnight. I think it might be a big step. It might not be as incremental as someone like you or me traditionally has always worked on.
Yeah. I mean, incremental, I completely agree. Was that saying that progress is the enemy of perfection, is it? I'm the same. I think incremental improvements is the way to go. And I think, again, you're right, we could go down a rabbit hole on this, but I think some of the experiences of law firms is that they just want to boil the ocean. They want to solve a huge systemic issue, but you need to take steps to get to.
I think if you go out and genuinely talk to the customer, the client, I think you'll hear that, right? And I think then some of the things become smaller because you've actually put them into context. What do I want to do? I want to have a quicker turnaround on my contract, and I'm willing for them to be more generic and less tailored, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe we work from a fair contracting position to take away negotiation. Those ideas will come out because someone will just say, sorry, they come from honest dialogue about the outcome we need to have, and context. I think sometimes as an industry, we're too generic. We say, okay, this is going to change everything and everyone will want this. But if you spend time with individual clients, you'll realize they've got individual challenges, and understanding that context can mean that there are simpler things come out. One of the interesting ones is Gen AI. Everyone's going on about summarization, saves people time because lawyers don't have to read contracts. Actually, maybe summarization will help clients, give documents to clients, because ultimately when you suddenly realize that contract, the lawyers don't sit there on the other side reading it to the sales team. They need something that says, don't do this because of this, and do this correctly because this is the lifespan of that contract. That's really interesting, right? Law firms could have done that 5 years ago, but it requires context. It requires context of what are the challenges for the people on the other end. And I think if you do that, then you can have a more positive dialogue and change needles slowly whilst playing with some of the big things in the background and what might it change, etc. But I can promise you, if the clients are not seeing the benefits of this and it just becomes, my firm has Gen AI, but I don't see any benefit, and by the way, the fee's gone up, everyone's going to call the button very quickly, right?
Yeah.
And then they're going to go, sorry, you said all this technology is going to change the world, but I haven't seen it in my bill. I haven't even seen an increment in my bill, and I don't believe the advice has got any better.
Well, there you have it. Absolutely fascinating. Alex, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the LOPSided Podcast with me, John O'Donoghue. Don't forget to follow us on TikTok, Instagram and LinkedIn at the LOPSided Podcast. Check out our website at www.thelopsided.com. thelopsidedpodcast.com, and most importantly, like us and subscribe to us here on YouTube.